Welcome back to our expert session. So every week we invite an expert to speak about topics related to digital marketing and how to attract your target audience online. So the topics are sent via email and shared in our Facebook group Skyrocket Blog Traffic, so be sure to be on the mailing list. The replays will also be put up in the Facebook group. And so without further ado, we have today Liz, and she will be talking to us all about the power of brand storytelling and how to connect meaningfully with audiences. So I'm going to hand it over to Liz now to let her introduce herself and tell her how exactly do you convert your audience from mere readers and followers to somebody who actually buys from you. Over to Liz.
Thank you, Isabel. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited to share a little bit about what I do with you and empower you on this wonderful thing that's brand storytelling. Because we all have a story to tell, even if it's a brand, we have a story to tell and share with everyone. And that's really the purpose of the talk today. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Liz. I run a small brand consultancy in South Africa, where I work with other freelancers and we work with small business clients and entrepreneurs to help them build voice and share their brand stories with the world. So brand orientated marketing essentially that we focus on. So a lot of what we do is helping brands through their content marketing learn how to use their brands in a way that carries and connects with their audiences. Okay, I'm a qualified brand strategist and designer. So branding is my jam. That's really my jam. Yeah, so let me jump into it. So brand storytelling, what is it? And what makes it different from just generally having branding or advertising on your social media platforms or on your website? What makes a brand story different? And we're humans, right? We like connecting with one another. We have almost created a little bit of a boundary to advertising because we're overwhelmed with media constantly. So in a world where we're overwhelmed with constantly being pumped media and products, how can we separate our brands? And I believe that's through the stories we have. There's a quote by Seth Godin. The quote says, "Marketing is no longer about the products we sell, but about the stories we tell, because we're connecting with the humans behind the brand, whether it's a big brand or a small brand." And that's really central to brand storytelling. People buy from people. Back in the day, when we had like advertising, it was all about advertising that product. And then somewhere along the lines, the advertising people realized doesn't work anymore. We can sell problems to people. You know, we're selling a beauty product by telling the people they need the beauty product for this and that reason. And then they realized, but it's not working anymore. And why is it not working anymore? And then they've said, okay, but we need to be more human-centric as brands. We need to focus on the human element of it and become customer-centric. And for a long period in the recent history, that has been what marketing was about, being human-centric as a brand. And somewhere along the lines, we started realizing with social media, being human-centric is not enough. One, audiences are overwhelmed with content and with choice. So there's a lot more people doing exactly the same thing. And so audiences can choose certain products or services from a variety of brands and sources. There's also this element of, yes, okay, you're saying you're human-centric and saying, or customer-centric rather, and customer is king, but what happens to the employees working for the brand? How are they being treated? What impact does a brand or business have on the environment around them and on the society around them? And audiences are becoming more skeptical then of the idea that brands have so much power, specifically when it's possibly not impacting the people and the planet in a really nice way. So to give you an example, just to show you how audiences are almost controlling the market by not being happy with this human-centric approach alone, is that take brands like Nestle. For instance, there's been a whole scandal about water and the community where they're taking water from. And people are not happy about that because they're exploiting people. Or fashion brands who are exploiting child labor in third world countries. So being human-centric in the sense of only being customer-centric doesn't work. And this is where the people buy from people comes into play. The people who buy from you want to know that you are caring not just about profit, but about the people and the planet and the animals on the planet. And that's really important. So that's part of the story of what's happening with how we're connecting with one another. We need to become not human-centric, we need to become more connected to the impact we have as brands. And the greatest impact we can have is showing up authentically as ourselves and showing the people behind the brand and how they embody the purpose and the vision and the mission and the values and the personality of that brand. Even if you're an individual business owner, it's the same thing. It will be a lot easier for you to sell a product if you explain your story with that product. Why did you create this product? Why do you think this product is important for the world? What could the impact be of this product beyond just a value add in terms of a product value? So what's the emotional value of the product? And that's why I say people buy from people. Isabel, do you have anything that you'd like to add with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially with how saturated everything is. The market is these days. It's like we connect with people. We don't connect with just things and materialism. We connect with stories, which is why I wanted to bring you in today to share more about storytelling. Because I think we all know we need to tell stories, but how to do it in a way such that it connects with your ideal audience, that's what you're great about, and that's what we want to hear more about today.
Yeah, so I've made a long list here on my other screen of things we can chat about. And this actually brings me to a really nice kind of launching pad into brand storytelling. So let's talk about the audience, right? And how to connect with the audience. I think it becomes quite easy when we have a product or service to focus purely on the product or the service in such a way where we go like, this is a great product, this is going to bring you value, and even the services, this is what I do. That's not what your audience likely wants to necessarily see or hear. Okay, so they might, let's say you're a photographer, okay, and you're doing wedding photography specifically. And now you have a couple who's interested to use you as their wedding photographer. And I've seen this time and time again. Why do the couple choose you? Yes, they might choose you for your quality photographs and the style of the photographs, but there is likely another photographer that has that same quality and style of photograph. So what's the differentiating factor between why the couple will choose you as the wedding photographer is likely your personality. It's likely how you deal with them in the process of what you're providing them. Are you providing them with a contract? Are you taking them through the contract in person, on Zoom? Or are you just sending that contract and that quotation? Are they perhaps choosing you because of you? That's essentially what it's about, right? And how much of that is present on your social media? So let's talk about social media and your website. Are you only showing your quality photographs, or are you introducing yourself? Are you telling them about how you handle the wedding day? Are you making yourself visible on your social media? Okay, so those are easy ways to tell your brand story, because it's what makes you unique. So simple things like sharing a little bit about you. You know what's more important? Sharing why you're doing this. If you're telling that wedding couple that you are doing this because you love the idea of romance and marriage and commitment, and you want to document this as best as possible for the couple, so that many years down the line, if they have marriage troubles, or if life happens and they have a good memory, they have these memories captured, During the pandemic now as well, many people lost their loved ones. The only source of photos possibly could be that during that couple's wedding, of granny being there. So why are you doing it? That is the driving factor behind story. Your brand story starts with, I don't know if the audience ever read this book or looked into it, but Simon Sinek has a book and a video on YouTube that talks about starting with why, your purpose. And it's the same in relationships, right? If I'm in a relationship with someone, we're going on our first date. Why do we get attracted to one another? We're sitting around the table getting to know one another. We want to know who the person is, what makes them tick, what are their hobbies, what kind of things do they like doing? And then if there's resonance, those two people connect. The same as with branding. Share that. Don't be afraid to share who you are, why you started the brand. And I think a lot of clients' challenges with us as well is they come to us and they say to us, Liz, we feel like we're repeating ourselves. What content can we put out? And in all honesty, constantly doing that just in little different ways with different themes that are relevant to your industry, you're likely not just doing one thing. You're offering wedding photography, you're offering lifestyle photography, you're offering corporate photography, corporate portraits. There's a who story behind the corporate. There's a who story behind the wedding photography. There's a who story behind the lifestyle photography. There's a why in every story. There's possibly also a personal story somewhere in your history about your experience getting married, or your experience getting corporate photos. It's about you going back into your bank of memories and thinking, but I had this problem, I'm solving it now for other people, but I can share that my journey from there to here and bring it together. And your audience will choose you based on your story, your why, and your values. So I know in the old days, we used to talk about a company profile having vision, mission, and values. But really, now it's the same thing. What is your vision for the world around you? Why do you want to do that? If you say to them it's because you want to make couples happy and bring memories into their life, that couple, again, they have that immediate attraction. That's their value likely too. They're looking for someone who understands that for them, who will give them the best for them on their wedding day. So those are the types of things audience-wise you need to think about in yourself and in others, how you can build that relationship through shared stories.
Yeah. Very insightful. You exactly answered my question, because I initially had this question about this telling a story about yourself. You only have one story, and sometimes maybe some people create a business out of the pure joy of maybe creating wax candles. They don't really have a giant transformation or like I went from rags to riches story. And so, I mean, your point about telling the why and talk about different who's, different segments of your own one story answers my question of how many times you can really tell your story.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my follow-up question. If, say in the travel space, right? I want to blog about travel simply because I love to travel. I don't really know what my impact of sharing about travel. How do you touch people with your story? If, say, you just wanted to travel, or somebody who's doing like my previous example of creating wax candles to sell, or knitting, they would like to knit. It's not like I'm making a huge difference in somebody's life. So how do you package this into a story that will connect with their audience?
So don't underestimate the power of small stories. Some of the best stories I've been told are small stories around campfires, right? If you look at human history, it's not always the celebrity story that's the one that makes the most impact. Yes, it has the most reach, but it doesn't always have the most impact. The stories that really carry that meaning are the small stories shared with smaller groups around the campfire. And that's kind of the same thing, is that your story will matter to the person who needs it. The approach I've obviously offered in the first bit is to talk more about like the personal more of a personal connection. But there's a story as well of the wax candle. If you're thinking of the wax candle, what's the story of candles in general? Why do people like buying candles? Right now, where we are in the world, self-care is a buzzword, but it is something that people are getting more and more in tune with, right? Needing to empower themselves. And it might be more of a superficial way of self-care, but pouring a bubble bath and putting the candles and starting your week on, whether it's a Saturday night or Sunday night, starting your week getting into that space where you're creating a space of self-love for yourself. That is a story. Getting into the bath and reflecting and deciding you're going to take care of yourself, that is a small story, but it has meaning. And so many people can relate to that, right? If you had to every week take people on a journey with you on your Instagram stories of what you are doing with your candles personally, that's a story. Not every story is a grand Lord of the Rings type of story, and it doesn't have to be. It can be the smaller stories that connect, or sharing your audience's stories. So are you creating a safe space for your audience to share their images and stories about how they are using their candles in their life? Maybe it's for religious reasons. Are you sharing that? Or maybe it's, you know, the wedding candle. Some cultures will each light a candle within the wedding ceremony. That's a beautiful story. And a lot of people
Yeah.
are doing so. The stories don't always have to be about you, even. You can, through the way you share, you can encourage other people to start almost a culture community around your product. You just have to get
Wow.
going with it. And even the
Yeah.
story of making the candles. So, who's making the candles? That's a story. Showing people the behind the scenes, that in itself is also a story
Mm.
to share. Same goes with knitting. You know, if you look at even YouTube, like how many people, they don't care about the artwork. They want to see on YouTube those tutorials just to watch how someone has
Mhm.
done it.
Yeah, wow, you've come up with plenty of stories just from candle making, just from creating candles. Which leads me to my next question. So, say you don't have, like, you're just starting out. We were just talking about storytelling and how you can create stories out of anything. Liz was just sharing about how we can create stories out of products that we're trying to sell. So, my next question was, what if someone's trying to sell a service instead? And so it's not that tangible. And also, how do you create stories around it other than your own?
I hear you. So I'm a prime example of that myself. In the service industry, it's almost easier because it's like you said earlier with like selling a product. If there's not necessarily like a human center at the brand, how do you tell a story about something as simple as a candle? With services, it's a lot easier. With services, there's that immediate human connection. So I can take you on a journey of my day-to-day business, right? That's a story. I can share my personal why as to why I started the service. I can even show you the hows, like how I do something differently than someone else does and why I'm doing it differently. So with service, it's almost a little bit easier because take, for example, like a website. If on the about page, I can share my whole history with you. On the home page, I can pull specific snippets from if I'm offering these services, I can directly below those services that I've listed on the home page explain to you why I offer these services. What's my story? Why did I decide on these services and not other services to bring in that human connection? I can show you a portfolio of work, which, yes, it's more product based, but I can show you the individual stories that I've worked with, you know, testimonials. I can share other people's stories about my services. I can share testimonials. When I ask for testimonials, I actually guide my clients on how to write the testimonial. I guide them in a way that is storytelling. So I'm asking them specific types of questions so that they're really creating a story on behalf of me about me. if that makes sense.
Wow, yes, definitely. I would definitely want a sneak peek into those guiding questions, because sometimes I feel like testimonials are very rigid and they're just like, oh, I like this service because of this, or like, oh, this thing changed my life, or like I increase how much because of this service. But it doesn't really tell a story, or like, yeah, it's very deadpan.
Yes.
And so I definitely want a sneak peek into that, if that's okay.
I'd be happy to
Which,
share image templates with the audience. I'll send it to you afterwards and you can post it on the
yeah,
Facebook group.
yeah. And also, what if someone's just starting out and they don't have, say, any customers or any proven success stories to begin with? I suppose you would say that you would just share mostly about yourself. Do you have a way to get around that?
I'd offer 2 tips. The first tip is, so you share your why, your purpose, quite often, because people are now becoming aware of you. To create proper brand awareness around your brand and your person, you're going to have to post regularly about who you are, what drives you, why you started the business. So you'd regularly post about those types of things. Another tip I would also offer for startups in general, it's maybe not directly answering your question, but I'm hoping it offers an indirect tip, is to offer some services for free for testimonials or products for free, just so that you have like a running ground to start off with. I know there's big conversations around whether we should do work for free and the types of boundaries we're setting, but it's a nice way to start identifying your ideal client, identify 5 of them and say to them, the only obligation is I give you all of this for free, but please do write me a review or a testimonial.
Yeah, that's definitely one way.
Mm,
Yeah, or go to your friends and family and offer them content, get the
yes,
feedback from them, or if you have clients that you've worked with in the past, get feedback from them. That's definitely
exactly.
one way. Cool.
Exactly.
Wanda, if you have any questions at all, feel free to jump in and shoot Liz any questions about brand storytelling.
Yes, please do.
I'm curious about how you craft that story. So, just like what you were saying about introducing yourself to your audience, like what does that story look like? You're saying that the service and the product can be difficult. So, what are some elements that you want to make sure? I know that people talk about putting the feeling and, like you said, put your why in there. But are there other elements that make it pop, that make people gravitate toward it to
Mm,
understand what it is you're
mm.
doing and what you're about?
Thank you so much for that question. So I'm just going to repeat that. You're asking specifically tips on how to craft the story more specifically, that you have almost a map of what to use when it comes to story. I'll offer you a little bit of an insight into the brand strategy work that I do, because I think that's a good starting point for any brand. Brand strategy essentially is understanding what guides the brand. Before you write the story, write down the purpose. So, what is the purpose of the brand? Like, why was the brand started? Write down the vision. What is the brand's impact going to be? What would you like the impact of that brand to be in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Okay. Um, Write down the brand's values. What do you want people to feel when they deal with this brand? Let's take the candle, for instance. When we spoke about the candle, I mentioned self-care specifically. So likely you want people to feel relaxed, right? Relaxation would be a really good value that you want to embody with the brand. Possibly romance. For candles, that might be another type of value you want to brand. You possibly other types of values that are specific to the people of the brand, stuff like care. Everyone who works at the brand, who makes the candles, are very caring, and they want to make sure that the brand comes across as a caring brand, a nurturing brand. So care, nurturing, excellent customer service. Let's just take those 5 values. I think that's for now enough to start with. You write those values down. In my business, one of my values, just to give you an example from a service-based side, one of my values is education, and my other value is empowerment. So they kind of use together that I love educating and empowering entrepreneurs and small business owners to be able to do their thing. Okay, so that's important for me. The other thing is quality. So I really focus on the quality of my services and the overall experience. So experience, I want you to come to me and have a unique experience. It's not just about coming in and I help you with your branding and marketing. I want you to come in and feel like you've had a unique experience, something that you've never experienced elsewhere. So those are 4 of my key values. You write those values down, those things that are important to you. Then you write your personality, right? Write the personality of the brand. So it's very similar to values, but these are more things like, is my brand humorous? Is it educational? Is it serious? You're writing personality words down. That's also a nice way where you'll connect it later on with story, because if you're writing down copy, like let's say you're writing down in your about page's story, okay? If you're writing your about page, is it matching the tone of the personality words you've identified? You need to consider that, because is what you're saying also what you really want to be doing? That's kind of what you need to, I think a lot of people have that misalignment of not sure how to represent their story, because then they're not actually looking at those 2 things and saying, are they matching one another? Okay. And then, so once you've written that type of stuff down, you have a visual language, obviously, as well. So you might have a visual language, which is your logo and the colors you use. So if you're saying your brand is humorous, but all your colors are gray, does a humorous brand look gray? It's likely yellow or orange or red. That's likely what you think of a humorous brand. So making sure all those elements match, that's just a good foundation building for your brand that sets the tone for the story. So that's not even yet when you've written the story, but that will already give you a really great idea. Okay, this is the brand. The step 2 would be to sit down and actually write a story about your brand. When you're crafting that story, work in a personal history. So a personal history could be in the service-based industry, like what brought me to start my brand. So I'll share mine with you so that you can get a kind of example. My brand is called Ostara Studio. So Ostara comes from a Germanic word called Iostor. The word means revitalization, refreshment. It's also a word in the Celtic history that represents spring, the spring equinox, and all that revitalized energy, right? And I chose that specifically because of my personal journey. I worked in a corporate where I was not stimulated. I reached the level I could in terms of climbing the corporate ladder, and I almost felt dead inside. It was like a part of my soul was missing. And as a creative person and as a strategic person, having that is probably one of the worst feelings I could have ever had. I think a lot of creatives will also likely feel exactly the same. You feel stuck, you feel powerless. So when I started my business after leaving the corporate company I worked for, I wanted to swing 180. I wanted to do something completely different. And it came to me, my whole thing is feeling alive and helping brands rejuvenate themselves. And that's where the name of my brand came from. Take that story, and I'm going to ask you now, in that story, did you feel empowerment? Did you feel the values that I mentioned earlier? And I said, write down your values. Did you feel those values of empowerment, of encouragement, of quality? So you see how those values start coming through just by connecting to something that's already within you. It's basically your why, your purpose. And then you're going to, from there, you'll break down into services and products. So once you have that base, almost umbrella story, you can then start and work out the rest of it. So I can then go in and tell you about my services and why I chose my specific services, because it still relates to that story. I'm bringing it back there. Now that's the about page. On social media, how you will do that is that your story doesn't just have to be this one big story and you're constantly sharing this big story. It can be, I use the example of a photographer. A photographer might have do weddings, lifestyle photography, corporate portraits, and there's a why and a how and a who in that. There's a why, a how, who, what, and every single element to that. So you can start sharing all those separate stories in smaller broken down posts. You can create brand pillars. So this is also a nice way to structure your brand story by identifying, I would recommend 3 to 5 brand pillars. Some people call it content bins. And those are really things that you're passionate about talking about, but passionate about talking about in a way that relates to your audience. So how is it bringing value to your audience? And those things are almost like overarching story themes, and then you can slot content underneath that. So that's also a nice way to structure story. And in the actual post then, which I think a lot of people aren't always doing, is if in your post, are you just talking mindlessly, or do you have a hook? Because on Instagram, that's the first thing people will see. The next part is relevancy. That's your story part. So if you're creating a post, your hook might be something like, do you hate visiting the toilet in other countries? It's something that is probably going to immediately make people like, whoa, what's she talking about? That's a hook, right? It's something that immediately grabs people's attention. It doesn't always have to be that dramatic, but just for the example, I'm going to the extreme. And then the next part is the relevancy. So what's your story about why you're talking about toilets and traveling? So maybe explain what happens if for a full day going on a tour and there's no bathrooms available to visit. That's part of your story. I've had this experience, so what can I do? And then you're offering maybe like a tip for them about what they can do in that situation. So do you see how on social media, it's little stories? And I think traveling is such a great way. Travel is such a nice genre to pull little stories from. And that would be great if your brand's humorous. To give you an example, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's really, really insightful. I'm taking down notes as you speak. But yeah, I think you've covered most of the questions that most people are thinking about revolving around storytelling and branding. Those are really good tips that we can apply immediately for sure.
Is there a specific brand story that you really like that hits on all of those points that you said, just to like say the whole thing?
There's not a specific brand necessarily that comes to mind because I think it's all contextual. A few of the people who for me have really inspired me when it came to brand story is Pixar, the animated motion pictures. There's a gentleman there called Ed Catmull, he's the CEO essentially he wrote a book about leadership and business management about Pixar. And the story was just to me about Pixar and how they came into being was just so powerful because you start understanding why they create such good movies when you understand the people behind the brand and the leadership behind the brand. So Pixar in general, I think, has for me, each movie of the writers and the directors and all the teams working on them, if you do a little bit of research, they all share their stories quite openly about those specific movies. Then I really love Brene Brown. I also really like the way Oprah as well, for instance, have carried her story throughout the years. That's a brand and a half for you. That's a way she's built a brand, an empire around her story. Everyone knows her story. So those, both Brene Brown, Oprah definitely as well. In terms of people like smaller brands that also do it well, there's a YouTube channel, and this might also be really helpful for your audience, called The Future, without an E at the end. In the future, there's a gentleman called Christo, I think. He's the marketing agency, and they've got this YouTube channel. If you look at the way he educates, because their whole thing is about educating 1 billion people across the world to be able to run their businesses successfully. So designers, marketers, those types of people. If you just go and look at one of his educational videos, like a pricing video, and you hear how with everything he does, he incorporates his own personal story, it's very inspirational because you actually understand the content when he's bringing in his own story the whole time. And I think that's just key and central to people who do it well. I know there's been a lot of, not always necessarily been good things that the brand has done, but I think a product brand that's known by most people, Nike has had the story of athleticism and leadership. They've had those types of stories. I might not agree always with all the things the brand does, but in terms of how they've represented story, they've created a mass following across the world just by those stories, being the best at what you do, whether you're a person going for a walk, whether you're in a gym doing a fitness class. Those types of stories and how they've done it in advertising is very clever when there's not like a central person in the brand, like how there's been with Apple and Steve Jobs, for instance, right? If there's not that connection, Nike is a good example of a product brand that uses story in a good way.
Cool. So you've talked a lot about projecting yourself as a brand through stories. Do you have any tips about engagement then? So you've already attracted your audience. How do you get them to, say, speak out and connect with you? Do you have any tips for that?
So they're already there. If they're your audience, they're likely already going to respond and engage with you, but make sure you're facilitating the process for engagement as well. So are you asking questions in your posts that make them want to answer or share of themselves? Are you utilizing technological trends? So on stories, are you using your polls like on Instagram stories? Are you using those box questions? You know what I'm talking about. But if you are doing that as well, when they are interacting with you, are you resharing it as well? So are you, if there's questions, are you encouraging further engagement by letting people read what other people have said? Because that type of curiosity, it creates another level of story and engagement. That's also other people almost sharing their stories with you. If you also have YouTube videos, I think a lot of YouTubers miss out on the fact of not all of them engage in the comment section. So how are you actually engaging with your audience on YouTube? And are you in YouTube encouraging people to comment because you want to hear from them?
Yeah, that's totally valid. And I'm extremely guilty of what you mentioned. I would post stories, I would have polls, I would have questions that I ask my audience, and then some of them would answer me, and then I probably would just reply them in private, but I don't share it on Insta stories. That could probably be why people don't engage much with me anymore. So that's something that I would definitely want to experiment and try on. Which brings me to my next point. So if let's say you're sharing about your stories and your transformation and your hows and your whys, how do you not portray yourself as narcissistic, if you know what I mean?
I hear you. The key difference for me between someone who's narcissistic and someone who's actually offering value is that also, are you working on the content that offers value to your audience? So it's a balance. In terms of narcissism, relate it back to your audience, right? If you're sharing a story, ask them about their experiences. So it's not just centered around your experience, but you're encouraging hearing about their experiences too. That's an easy way of doing that. And then also, you don't always just have to share about yourself. You can work in other types of valuable pieces of content. So let's take travel as another example, or even the wedding photographer example I used earlier. Of course, your couple, they're going to want to see your photos. It's okay to post the photos, not photos about you, but the photos of your work on your Instagram. They're going to want to see that. Similar with travel, they're going to likely want to see your travel locations, not just you in a travel shot. So one post might be more centered around you and your experience, or the caption might be about you and your story, but the image is about something else. Let's say you post a specific location, and in the caption you telling a little bit of a story about the location. That's something, you're telling a story about the location and not necessarily just about you. Is that helpful?
Yeah, for sure.
I also think unless you're actually narcissistic, like there's this thing, and I think maybe it's with women specifically as well, where we're just shy. It's like, oh, I'm drawing too much attention to myself. I'm talking about myself too much. I think that people are drawn to the brand because of who you are and how you show up in the world, how you speak, how you look, all of that good stuff. And so when you share a bit about yourself, I think it helps them to gravitate more towards the work. Yeah, I think there are delicious ways that we're able to do that. And I don't know that it's an overshare, you know?
No, I love
Yeah,
what you say about it's about how you show up.
yeah, we have covered a lot of ground today. Do you have any last questions or last tips you want to share with the audience?
I don't want to share one tip because you mentioned SEO. So I wanted to mention this because I think that's something that not a lot of people have thought about. I know with SEO, so many people are like with meta descriptions, right, that show up on Google. They are so focused on keywords that they're not actually ad copy. So people are going to click through not because of your keywords. Your keywords are going to help you rank, but people are going to click through and read your blog and read your story if there's a little enticing story there for them to read. So don't forget about that. Don't forget to add your little story about
Yeah.
what the blog is about. Otherwise, I think it's a missed opportunity for people to actually click through.
Yeah, I agree with that. I noticed that with my behavior as well when I was searching about a destination to go, and I chanced upon this travel blogger along dusty roads, and they have a lot of travel guides. And what made me actually read all of them and even go onto their Instagram to shoot a message to say, hey, your travel guides are really useful, was because of how much they injected their personal experience and their personal recommendations and what not to visit, which is really a distinct difference between someone who just enters and then bounce back out of your website and someone who becomes a loyal reader. Excellent. Cool. Thank you very much today for both of your times. And we've learned so much. I will definitely put the replay up on the Skyrocket Blog Traffic Facebook group. And I'll also introduce you. So if anybody has any questions, they can shoot you a message.
Thank you so much
Cool.
for the opportunity. I love it. And I will also remember to, let me just
Send-
write that down,
send-
send the
yeah.
little testimonial question
Yeah, I think it'll be
template.
very useful for some of the audience as well, because some of them are like coaches and they want to really grow their brand as a coach, but they're running out of stories to share. And I look forward to seeing you again in our next week's expert session.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.